So this year marks the 10th year of Critical Role, the stream Dungeons & Dragons shows. 10 years of adventure, laughs, and tears with this group of nerdy voice actors. As well, this year marked the end of Critical Role's most recent campaign, Campaign 3, The Story of Bell's Hells, with what felt like, in many ways, the end of an era for Critical Role and Matt Mercer's world of Exandria. So with some potential big changes seemingly coming for Critical Role in their 4th campaign, I started wondering, what is the best Critical Role campaign? Hello everyone, I'm Finn. Welcome back to finnfilms. As many of you know, I am a massive nerd, a lover of all things fantasy, Dungeons & Dragons, and everyone's favorite nerdy voice actors, Critical Role. In today's video, I'm going to go over all of the pros and cons, everything I liked and everything I didn't like from Critical Role Campaign 1, 2, and 3, to try and answer the question, which Critical Role campaign is really the best? Before we get started, guys, obviously this video is going to be compromised of my opinions as a longtime Critical Role fan, and some of you are probably going to disagree with me on many things that I say in this video, and that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. There's not really an objectively right answer to this question, so if you end up disagreeing with me and what I think the best Critical Role campaign is, then just drop your opinion in the comment section down below on what your favorite campaign is and what you think its pros and cons are. As well, if you do enjoy this video and you learned something new, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to support me, and it really does go a long way in putting this video into the algorithm. Oh, and obviously, guys, this video will contain spoilers for Critical Role campaigns 1, 2, and 3, if that isn't obvious. Okay, so with that out of the way, we can finally get started, and what better way to do that than with the campaign that kicked everything off for Critical Role, Campaign 1. Ah yes, Critical Role Campaign 1, The Legend of Vox Machina, a traditional classic fantasy hero's journey story of a group of ragtag adventurers who answered the call to action to defend their homeland and loved ones against evil that would threaten it. It's kind of crazy to think that 10 years ago, 18-year-old me was by chance stumbling upon episode 1 of Critical Role, The Journey to Craghammer on the Geek and Sundry YouTube channel. I mean, it does still blow my mind that what started out as this scuffed, funny, wholesome Dungeons & Dragons livestream was adapted into a crazy high-budget animated series. Like, holy shit. What a come up. Okay, enough glazing and nostalgic membering. Let's just get into the nitty gritty and start out with what I think are some of the major cons of Critical Role Campaign 1. So for starters, it kind of shocks me just how many Critical Role fans in the year 2025 actually haven't watched Critical Role Campaign 1. I've talked with so many of my fellow Critical Role fans who were introduced to Critical Role either at the end of Campaign 1 or during Campaign 2. So let me tell you, if you started watching Critical Role during Campaign 2, then going back and trying to watch the early episodes of Campaign 1 is going to feel, well, it's going to feel like f***ing whiplash. And a large part of that is due to the early production quality, or should I say lack thereof. I honestly think that a lot of the kind of old school Critical Role fans, people who were there pretty early on in Campaign 1 in the Geek and Sundry days, are kind of clouded by nostalgia bias when it comes to Critical Role Campaign 1. Because, guys, let me tell you, a lot of those early episodes are borderline unwatchable at times due to, technical issues. Now, in many ways, this kind of added to the lo-fi kind of charm and novelty of Critical Role, especially back in the day. A lot of the moments of Campaign 1 very much felt like a group of friends that were just playing their home game, but with a camera turned on. And when you compare that to Campaign 2 and 3, which feel very much more like a kind of watching a high-quality production, a live improv play. And it feels that way because that's kind of what it was, a group of friends who had a home Dungeons & Dragons game that were all of a sudden streaming it live to thousands of people. Now, I'd say that technically this is a pro as well as a con. It's a pro because it was wholesome as hell, and you could really feel the chemistry that this group of friends had when you watched them roleplay together. Of course, these group of friends weren't just any group of friends, they were a group of exceptionally talented voice actors. However, it was a con because in many ways it felt like a home game and all of the chaos that comes with a home game. If you compare Campaign 1, especially the first half of Campaign 1 to Campaigns 2 and 3, there was a way more table talk and distractions during the campaign, during the live stream games, than any of the other Critical Role campaigns or any other of their productions. Again, this is pretty understandable because it took the group a while to kind of really shift away from this very classic home game dynamic to something more resembling an improv stage play, this kind of feeling. And while the table talk and shithousery is very relatable and is hilarious to anyone who's played Dungeons & Dragons in person, it definitely does at times take away from the storytelling experience of Critical Role as a whole. And of course, there's the elephant in the room, Orion Akaba. Now, I've done an entire video on Orion and his problematic player behavior, if you will. I'll link it into the eye above if you want to see me go into more of a deep dive on that entire situation. I don't really want to just shit on this guy, though, but in short, his time in the first 27 episodes of Critical Role was quite problematic. From main character syndrome to horrible table etiquette, straight up cheating in Dungeons & Dragons and fudging dice rolls, and a number of moments which made many people at the table, as well as people in the audience, extremely uncomfortable. I mean, who could forget that one moment when it looked like Travis was about to rip this dude's head off live on stream?
As Vex is saying this, Tiberius is getting a half chub.
A what?
Hey.
Well, that's just weird.
You can't see it because it's inside.
Yes, because you said it out loud. So.
Anyway.
I'm just saying, strategy.
Fair enough.
Strategy.
Oh, it's strategy, Chuck. All right.
Strategy chub.
Strategy chub, okay.
Come on.
Not choices.
Long story short, Orion was a pretty classic case study on the problematic player and the tendencies that come with that. And again, if you want to learn about this in more detail, go watch the video I made over it. Now, with that elephant out of the way, let's talk about the pros of Campaign 1. As I said at the start of the video, Campaign 1 in many ways is kind of a quintessential fantasy story, an upstart ragtag group of adventurers who reluctantly accept this hero's journey, a quest, a higher calling to defend their friends, loved ones, and the place that they call home. This campaign hits a lot of these kind of really classic fantasy tropes, from battling a cabal of evil dragons to stopping an ancient evil lich hell-bent on godhood, and for a lover of classic traditional kind of fantasy tropes, this is pretty awesome. Another thing that I love about Campaign 1, and one of the main things I think that really caused a lot of people to fall in love with Critical Role, is the characters and their party dynamic. Campaign 1 has some absolutely amazing characters, character stories, and character progression. Every single character in Campaign 1 has at least one really cool story arc and character progression moment, maybe with the only one that kind of doesn't being Ashley's character Pike, and a large reason for this is just because Ashley wasn't at the table that often. She wasn't around that often because she was off in New York filming the show Blind Spot. I think if you asked many Critical Role fans who their favorite characters were from all of the campaigns, a large portion of people would name characters from Campaign 1 from Vox Machina, and while some of that may be nostalgia, it is nostalgia for, I would think, pretty good reason, because these characters are fantastic along with their dynamic with each other. A big reason for this, a big reason for the chemistry for Vox Machina, is that the cast had played these characters for years before Critical Role was ever streamed. In many ways, the characters from Campaign 1 are the most fleshed out characters from any Critical Role campaign, and I think that a large portion of this is due to just how long the cast members played these characters, and thus how comfortable they were and the chemistry that was developed from doing this. Another thing that I love about Campaign 1 is it has probably my favorite arc from any Critical Role campaign, 1, 2, and 3, and that is the Briarwood arc. Despite still being plagued by a number of technical issues, the Briarwood arc, in my opinion, is one of the best story arcs that Critical Role has ever done across all 3 campaigns. This is due to a variety of reasons, one being Percy is my favorite Critical Role character probably of all time, and a large part of this is due to his awesome backstory and the character progression that he goes through throughout this arc and then post this arc. 2. The Briarwood arc contains what are, in my opinion, some of the best villains that Matt Mercer has ever created. Silas and Delilah Briarwood are this tantalizingly evil, sadistic couple that you can't help but hate, but also love at the same time. They are horrifically evil and cruel people, yet when you learn about their backstory, their tragic love story, and how Silas's death was ultimately the catalyst that led them down this dark path, you can't help but feel at least a little bit of empathy for them. I absolutely love tragic and relatable villains that do horrible things, that are evil at their core, but there is still something relatable, something human to them, and this is very much the essence of Silas and Delilah. And finally, 3, just how freaking brutal the Briarwood arc actually is. The Briarwood arc might as well be called the trauma arc, and Taliesin, God bless this man, absolutely eats this shit up and puts on an amazing performance as Percy during these 11 episodes. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think that the Briarwood arc was actually only 11 episodes long, but goddamn were those 11 episodes amazing and brutal. As well, this arc had some of the best moments in all of Critical Role, from Taliesin hitting us with such amazing lines like,
and I'm just firing chest shots, and I'm just making a hole the size of a baseball in his chest. And as it happens, as I keep unloading, the gun still breaks, and I'm still pulling the trigger. You fool, your soul is forfeit! Die! Die!
You have a poison in your mind, and the fact that you can't see it makes me so sad.
to Matt doing absolutely amazing Dungeon Master things, giving us moments like that sun tree scene, as well as absolutely amazing Delilah lines like this one.
The horror of seeing her partner, the love of her life, disintegrated before her. Tears immediately burst down her face, and her hands are shaking in there. She just screams out, "You can't! I broke the world for us!"
I think that out of all of the campaigns, Campaign 1 probably had the most iconic, memorable moments. From all of the Grog deck of many thing moments, to Scanlan's many hilarious antics and musical numbers, to that time that Matt left himself completely speechless after he laid waste an entire city of Amon, leaving everyone completely shook at the beginning of the Chroma Conclave arc. I think it really goes to show just how good Critical Role Campaign 1 was, that you can kind of overlook many of its technical issues and audio problems and the many growing pains that Critical Role was going through at this time because of just how good a lot of the storytelling actually was that you were watching. Okay, I think that's probably enough nostalgic dribble for Campaign 1. I think it's time that we move on to... So if Campaign 1 was kind of this classic fantasy trope story, then Campaign 2, the story of Mighty Nein, well, is not that. Campaign 2 is a much more nuanced, kind of intricate story, filled with all sorts of morally gray characters in a even more morally gray world. The primary kind of story crux of Campaign 2 focusing on the political struggle between the Dwendalian Empire and the Kryn dynasty of Xhorhas. Now, for some Critical Role fans who were big fans of Campaign 1, that shift in tone for Campaign 2 came as a bit of a surprise. Specifically in the morality of our party, their absolutely chaotic dynamic, and the overall story tone and themes of Campaign 2. Well, technically this isn't a con for me, as personally I absolutely love the more nuanced gang of characters in Campaign 2, as well as the kind of greater story of political subterfuge and the kind of bending of classic D&D tropes that are specifically in Campaign 2. Some people, definitely fans of Campaign 1, probably didn't like this as much. I'm gonna be honest, guys, I kind of struggled a bit when I was trying to come up with definitive, noticeable cons for Critical Role Campaign 2. To me, probably one of the most obvious cons of Campaign 2 is the shift away from the live broadcast to a pre-recorded broadcast that happened in Campaign 2 episode 100, and this format has carried on ever since. Now, there are perfectly good reasons why Critical Role ultimately had to make the shift to a pre-recorded broadcast. You know, the whole pandemic thing. And 2, it just kind of generally seemed to make things easier on the cast and their extremely busy schedules to record the broadcast ahead of time instead of rushing to try to do a live shoot. And while at this point in time, most of the audience is used to Critical Role being pre-recorded, a large portion of the audience having never known that Critical Role was actually live, it still feels to me as an old fan that some of the magic was kind of lost that the live environment ultimately brought. Watching Critical Role live kind of felt like this big event. It felt like we as an audience were very much more involved in kind of a part of the performance that was taking place. Whether it was live giveaways or just the cast members checking their phone to read chat and see the crazy reactions during the broadcast, or just the cast members talking to us, the audience, the chat, because it was a live experience. I think that's kind of the appeal of live streams in general as opposed to pre-recorded video content. It's this interaction between we, the audience, and the performers performing for us. I think this is part of what makes professional wrestling so good, as an example. I mean, the performers feeding off the live crowd is really what sets kind of the tone and the feeling when you are watching something that is live. And while obviously being live at a professional wrestling event is not the same as watching a Twitch stream live, there was something special to me about knowing that you were watching something take place live and unedited. There's something real and raw about that feeling. Something that connects us as the viewer to the performance that we are watching. And again, while at this point much of the fan base has grown used to Critical Role being pre-recorded, it does feel like they've lost a little bit of magic that they had when ultimately they made this decision, but again, I don't begrudge them for doing this. Another kind of more notable con that I kind of thought of when I was thinking back to the story of Campaign 2 for me was the closing arc, the closing storyline of Eeyore and the strange mages of the Somnovan. Now, I'm very torn about this because I love the mysteries of Eeyore, this advanced mage-like society that was brought low by the gods during the Calamity. But what I didn't love was the big bad kind of final baddie, the big bad evil guy of Campaign 2, the Somnovan. I don't know what it was, but I just had a really hard time kind of buying into this. While it was cool getting to see the link in kind of the coming of full circle of the story of Talison's character Molly, aka Lucian, aka the Nonagon, as this ultimately kind of big bad evil guy wielding the Somnovan's power, to me, it just didn't feel like a proper climax, especially when you compare it to the climax of Campaign 1. Honestly, I think that the fourth arc of Campaign 2, the Swords and Angels arc with Yasha, Oban, and the Betrayer God, the Chained Oblivion, to me, probably would have made for a better climactic ending to Campaign 2. I mean, what's really more threatening to the world of Exandria as a whole? A powerful group of crazy mages, or a crazy cult led by a powerful fiend that had control over the party's friend Yasha, this cult trying to release an elder evil, a mad deity of destruction and chaos that even the gods themselves are afraid of in Tharizdun. At least that's my opinion. I'm sure that a lot of people will probably disagree with me on that one. But overall, I kind of struggled in coming up with like really significant cons for Campaign 2. So let's just get on to the pros. As I said, Campaign 2 is a very different story tone and party dynamic than Campaign 1, and I absolutely love it. I really love the overall nuance in the story being told in Campaign 2. The fact that our entire party are really not these kind of bastions of morality, especially when you compare it to Vox Machina in Campaign 1. Overall, Campaign 2 feels a lot more real than Campaign 1. There is way less of a divide between good and evil, right and wrong. It's all kind of more of a spectrum of morality, if you will, a spectrum of grayness, and I think that these themes are really encapsulated in the dynamic between the Dwendalian Empire and the Xhorhasian Dynasty. I've talked about this in several other Critical Role videos, but one of my favorite things about Campaign 2 is how Matt Mercer subverts many of the kind of stereotypes and themes of traditional fantasy lore, specifically with the Xhorhasian Dynasty. We are first introduced to the dynasty in Campaign 2 through the Dwendalian Empire's propaganda. We are told that they are an evil dynasty built on the ruins of the Betrayer God city, and that they are inherently evil. Matt does a really awesome job kind of setting up this dynamic between these two political factions, and then ultimately turning things on their head. The Dwendalian Empire featuring your classic kind of good ancestries from Dungeons & Dragons, humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes, while the dynasty largely features drow, orcs, and goblins, peoples that are traditionally depicted as evil within classical tropes of Dungeons & Dragons and overall fantasy. Yeah, thanks Tolkien for doing my homies the orcs absolutely dirty. However, it is then ultimately revealed throughout Campaign 2 that these things are not as they seem. In fact, when you compare many people within the Empire, specifically those in the Cerberus Assembly, the Kryn dynasty very much seems like the good guys at times. In reality, though, this conflict between the dynasty and the Empire is much more gray. Both sides have their reasons and justifications for disliking each other, and as such, the conflict feels much more real than kind of a classic fantasy story of black and white morality, a tale of good versus evil. And personally, I absolutely love this shit. Another thing I love about Campaign 2 is its cast of characters. The party of Campaign 2 as a whole is filled with some of my favorite characters, and I would argue some of the cast's best characters they've ever played. I mean, Jester is probably my favorite Laura character, Caleb is probably my favorite Liam character, Ford has one of my favorite character arcs of any character in Critical Role, and is probably tied with Chetney for Travis's best character, and best of all, we actually get a full campaign with Ashley Johnson and her character Yasha. Yasha rivaling Percy and Caleb, it being one of the most tragic Critical Role characters of all time. Another thing that I really love about Campaign 2, and this might sound kind of weird when I say it, is the death of Talison's character, Mollymog. This is hands down one of the greatest moments of all time within Critical Role, and Molly's death had a drastic impact on the party and the overall story being told in Campaign 2. Character death, or the threat of character death, is a very important part of Dungeons & Dragons. This threat of death is what ultimately brings tension to combat. The threat of death, potentially losing a character, is really what creates the stakes in D&D. I mean, think about it. If there was no threat of death ever, why would anyone care at all about combat in Dungeons & Dragons? Up until this point, we had seen characters die in Critical Role, but they were always brought back to life within a few episodes. So I think many people in the fan base had kind of been lulled into this false sense of security. Up until this point, there was always this kind of thin veil of plot armor for our characters. They always seemed to escape death by the skin of their teeth, and when a character did die, they were always brought back to life at some point. Though I will give Matt credit for making the players actually work for it, and oftentimes having to sacrifice something in order to get one of the characters back, as is the case with Vax and the Raven Queen in Vex's Resurrection. However, I think that Molly ultimately dying in Campaign 2 was one of the best things that could have happened for Critical Role and the Mighty Nine. This moment felt like it really kind of bonded the party together, and it very much upped the stakes in this campaign. We need to remember that Molly's death happened pretty early on in Critical Role Campaign 2, I believe it was episode 26, and this death very much caught everyone off guard. Aside from the attack on Emon in the Chroma Conclave arc, I can't remember a time when I saw the cast of Critical Role more stunned than at this moment when they realized that Molly was dead and there was no way for them to bring him back. This to me is one of the most iconic and greatest moments in all of Critical Role, and I really give Taliesin a lot of credit for letting this character actually go and choosing to play a new character, as Molly's death really became a kind of rallying point, a very much a bonding moment within the story for this group of characters. And honestly, I feel like it would have really robbed the overall story of Campaign 2 of this feeling had Molly been revived like 5 episodes later. Finally, then, this brings us to the closing of a chapter in Critical Role with Critical Role Campaign 3, the story of Bell's Hells. Now, a few weeks ago, I did a video covering my thoughts kind of in great detail, specifically reviewing Campaign 3 as a whole. I'm going to be covering some of the same ground that I did in that video for this section of this video, but if you want a more kind of detailed breakdown of my thoughts on Campaign 3 as a whole, what I liked and what I didn't like, I definitely recommend you go check that video out. I'll be linking it in the eye above. To me, Campaign 3 is easily the most divisive of the 3 Critical Role campaigns. It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly why this is, but I believe I've narrowed it down to a few things. One of the most obvious is Campaign 3's barrier to entry. Campaign 3 being in many ways a kind of culmination of the stories of Campaigns 1 and 2. The grand story of Campaign 3, the mystery of this god-eating entity Prodathos, is not really possible without the groundwork and world building that was laid out in Campaigns 1 and 2. Because of this, you can't really appreciate or even really understand the kind of story depths that are going into Campaign 3 without watching Campaigns 1 and 2, as well as the accompanying miniseries EXU Calamity and Downfall. As Calamity and Downfall are must-watches to fully appreciate the story, themes, and concepts that Matt is trying to tell in Campaign 3. Spoiler alert, by the way, to me, this is also going to be a pro for Campaign 3. Again, though, you can't really appreciate or even really fully understand the story of Campaign 3 without watching all of this other content first, because Campaign 3 is very much a work of long-term storytelling. I think this is one of the reasons why newer fans had a little bit of difficulty in kind of buying into Campaign 3, as it is hard to really appreciate the complexity of a long-term story like this without the deep lore from all the campaigns. As well, I think Campaign 3 really did struggle from some pacing issues, both within the story and in real life. As Campaign 3 took longer to finish than the 2 other stream games, largely this being due to the fact that they took, several months breaks for both miniseries, EXU Calamity and Downfall. 2 miniseries which I absolutely love and adore, by the way, but if you are someone who only wants to watch the actual main cast of Critical Role, then this was probably frustrating. As well, unlike Campaign 2, Campaign 3 largely only focuses around one primary kind of story element. Campaign 1 is divided pretty cleanly into relatively 3 different story arcs. The same can kind of be said about Campaign 2, but Campaign 3 largely revolves around one singular story story, the mystery of the Red Moon Ruidus, and the ultimate reveal that this moon is a prison for a god-eating entity named Predathos. The first third of the campaign largely focusing around the reveal of this mystery, while the final 2/3 focuses on resolving this conflict, the problem of what to do with the gods, and the inevitable war between Ludinus Delath and his moon cult minions. Because of this and many other reasons, Campaign 3 at times felt like it really lagged in its story. One moment there would be this kind of major plot reveal, a major action happening that moved the plot along, only for months of real-life time to advance before the story would again feel like it made any meaningful progression. Now, I need to say this, don't get it freaking twisted. Despite Campaign 3 having some notable problems, I actually loved this campaign a lot. But I do acknowledge that not everyone is going to love Campaign 3 as much as I did. Personally, I love the deep lore of Matt Mercer's World of Exandria, specifically the time period of the Calamity. So to me, getting 2 very cool miniseries exploring the Calamity with Brandon Lee Mulligan, as well as having a primary Critical Role campaign which very much focuses around the many mysteries of the gods, was perfect for someone like me. As well, I love the long-term storytelling of Campaign 3, the fact that it is a story over 10 years in the making, that it is a story that requires extensive lore knowledge to really appreciate everything in its fullest. I think that this is super ambitious and a really cool way to send off this kind of era of the last 10 years of Critical Role, but again, not everyone is going to appreciate this as much as I did. The same goes for our cast of characters, a group of characters that, similar to the Mighty Nine, are pretty morally ambiguous outside of Liam's character Orem. They are probably even more morally ambiguous than the characters of the Mighty Nine, as again, outside of Orem, I don't know if I would describe much of the party of Bell's Hells as being actually good. Personally though, I really like this. It makes the characters and the world feel much more real and relatable to most normal people, as most normal people aren't exactly bastions of morality, especially when they are presented with very difficult decisions. Again though, not everyone will like this, and I know that not everyone was a fan of some of these characters, especially when you compare them to the likes of the Mighty Nine and Vox Machina. To me though, I absolutely love all of these characters and their backstories. For example, Ashton and FGG have some of the coolest backstories of any of the characters to date, and I think that Sam is really amazing at coming up with really cool and interesting characters and their stories to tell. Chetney is probably my favorite Travis character, a character that allows him to be a source of comedic relief and chaos, but also allows him to be wise and use his big brain for combat scenarios. Fern is hands down Ashley's best character to date, and I don't think Liam gets enough credit for playing a morally stable character like Orem in a group of complete chaos. I think one of my favorite things and parts, though, about Campaign 3 as a whole is Ludinus Delath, a character that is probably my favorite villain that Matt Mercer has ever created. To me, there is nothing better than a villain who is super relatable, a villain that presents an argument for his evil deeds in such a way that it makes you stop and go, wait a second, this dude kind of has a point here, and that's very much Ludinus Delath. Yes, a cabal of ancient evil dragons is pretty cool. So is an all-powerful lich hell-bent on becoming a god. But there's something about a spite-driven, traumatized ancient wizard who watched his world be destroyed by the gods that his people worshipped, only for them to leave the remaining mortals behind to pick up the pieces of the world that they destroyed, that really gets me going. My favorite villain archetype is the justified villain, a villain that makes you stop and question everything you thought you knew about your own morality, and that, my friends, is Ludinus Delath. All in all, I think that Campaign 3 isn't necessarily for everyone, but it is way better than what some people think, specifically those people in the fan base who gave up on Campaign 3 really early. But hey, maybe I'm just biased because of how much I love EXU Calamity and Downfall. If you are one of those people who gave up on Campaign 3 early, I highly recommend that you give it another go, especially if you are someone who loves the kind of deep lore in the world of Exandria that Matt has created, as Campaign 3 is easily the most impactful campaign on the story and the overall kind of world that Matt has created as we know it so far. And it's more than likely that what happened at the end of Campaign 3 with the gods is going to have a drastic impact on the story of Campaign 4. So then, after all of this, which Critical Role campaign is actually the best? Honestly, I think my answer might change based on the day that you ask me, but right now, I feel like Campaign 2, The Story of the Mighty Nine, is probably the best Critical Role campaign, or at the very least, it's my favorite right now. I love all 3 of these campaigns for a variety of reasons, and I do think that that is partially the beauty of Critical Role. All 3 campaigns and the 3 different parties are completely different stories with completely different story themes, and because of that, there is something to love with each of them. Overall, Campaign 2 is probably my favorite. Campaign 1 is my favorite singular arc in the Briarwood arc, and Campaign 3 has my favorite story themes in its links to the Calamity and the deep lore of Exandria and the gods. At the end of the day though, guys, these are just my thoughts and opinions, so feel free to disagree with me and let me know yours in the comment section down below. What do you think is the best Critical Role campaign? As always, friends, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something new, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as that is the easiest way to support me, and it really does go a long way in helping to put this video into the algorithm. If you did like this video, then why don't you check out some of my other Critical Role and Dungeons & Dragons content on screen now. Thank you again so much for watching and continuing to support me. As always, guys, until next time, stay safe out there. Peace. Love. Adieu.